Folsom Lake Honda, your one-stop Honda shop, is Mike Sando from The Athletic. Mike, thanks for the time. It's appreciated as always, my friend. Is there any tangible and or logical reason to feel good about Jimmy G's future as a Raider?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think he's going to play for them. So, I don't think this is like a career-ending injury or something, but I do feel like they probably got less talent at the quarterback position this offseason when you look at, having Carr and Stidham going to Jimmy G coming off injury and Brian Hoyer. I mean, you'd probably take what was behind door number one most of the time.
Right.
So, I think Garoppolo serves a specific purpose for them in that they're rolling with Josh McDaniels and he wants to do things a certain way that not everybody, that isn't the easy way. And so you bring in somebody who's going to kind of be an ambassador for that. I think that's what the Jimmy Garoppolo signing is.
Some folks have expressed dismay or at least confusion over what the Raiders have done this offseason, including Devontae Adams in some comments. Do you see the vision or the plan?
No, I agree. I agree that some of the things are hard to justify. When you look at who some of the more talented players have been on the team, I think Darren Waller would be part of that. So, and Derek Carr would be too. So, the way they handled getting out of the Carr situation made them not get anything in return for him. And then they didn't end up, getting whoever, Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady. So there wasn't a clear upgrade. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo's on his best day, probably Derek Carr, right? So, there's not a whole lot of, you wouldn't just say on paper that they've gained a lot. Now, they're probably trying to get certain types of people on the roster. It's just a little bit of a dangerous game to play because really your job as a coach is to get the most talented guys and get the most talent out of them.
Mike Sando with us here on Cattles and Rami, Sactown Sports on this Friday. Let's jump to the 49ers, Mike. What have you made of how the 49ers have handled their quarterback room this offseason with bringing in Sam Darnold? And, boy, there's a lot of talk about how Darnold could be great. There's a lot of talk about how Trey Lance is coming back around. A lot of positivity, Mike.
I feel like they think and probably have proven they have a pretty high floor for the quarterback play in San Francisco, partly because of the offense they run.
Right.
Kyle Shanahan's track record, really good weapons there. So I don't think they're as worried about that position as a lot of people would be. They probably feel like they can win, not with anybody, but I mean, Brock Purdy's coming close to that, right? I mean, he was such a late draft pick, no one was talking about him. So it's possible they're overestimating their ability to go far and win it all with what they have at the position. But if anyone's going to get more out of guys than they should, it's probably them, and they've proven that.
Who do you think of those three quarterbacks has the highest ceiling or gives that offense the highest ceiling?
Well, we can't at all project on Trey Lance. I mean, he just hasn't done anything. So you'd probably say Purdy until proven otherwise. I think Sam Darnold's played a ton, and he has to just prove that he can be a viable player. Whatever they got from him would be a great bonus. And if he were to rekindle his career, great. But you can't bank on that. So you'd just have to say, hey, it was a pretty good thing they had going with Purdy, and you'd like to see more of that. The ceiling stuff is just, what does that mean when we don't know what Trey Lance can even do? I mean, I guess his ceiling's unlimited because he only played 2 games, right? Right? Yeah, it's a dangerous game to me to just project because we haven't seen a guy play a lot that he could be amazing.
Mike Sando with us on the Folsom Lake Honda Hotline. Mike, let's jump to DeAndre Hopkins. Obviously, the Cardinals released him this week. Mm-hmm. Where do you think he lands?
I think that's a function of how much. I think there's going to be a period of adjustment for him because he probably regards himself, based on his production, as one of the very best receivers in the league, and the league isn't going to pay him that. And the biggest problem for teams right now was probably the deal that OBJ got from Baltimore.
Yep.
Ravens were desperate, and they were buying a name. They were overpaying because they were trying to get Lamar Jackson signed, and they wanted to send a signal to their locker room and their quarterback. They were serious, and they gave him $15 million a year, which is more than you thought he would get. If you're DeAndre Hopkins, it's hard to take a lot less than that, isn't it? Because you feel like you're better than that, justifiably so. There could be a little bit of a waiting game there for some of these teams. I think there's a couple good fit teams for him. I mean, obviously the best teams in the league would love to add him, and we've seen Kansas City and Buffalo, but I think a team like Detroit would be interesting because they had traded away Hawkinson, their tight end, and they, could use a guy. Now, I don't know if he fits the Dan Campbell mold and program. Probably the price determines that. Another interesting team could be Miami, just because they have great speed, but they don't really have that type of move the chains guy who'd be very dangerous, especially with all the attention going to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So those are teams you haven't probably heard mentioned a lot. Could be interesting.
And we heard only two teams. I think it was Kansas City and Buffalo inquired when he was on the trade block, and now he's sitting out there as a free agent to be had by anybody. Is it simply the price tag and a game of chicken, a staring contest, if you will, with DeAndre Hopkins and the teams that might be interested?
I think it is. I think there's a period of time where the really good, accomplished player who's been used to making a ton of money has to realize and sort of has to sink in what the real market is. Us following sports for years and years and years, we've seen this play out 100 times. But for the player themselves, it's the first time, right? He had a $19 million salary till last week, so it's probably when people are talking to you and offering you a sliver of that or less than half of that, you probably don't jump at it. That's why I think there would be a period of time, you would think, until he realizes what the actual market is, and maybe he can get something with some incentives. Maybe he can find a situation where he feels like he can win and be with a good quarterback and come out a year from now and really, get more money.
Mike Sando with us. Mike, looking back now that we have more context after Aaron Rodgers spoke with The Athletic, is there anything different Green Bay could have or should have done with him going back a couple of years ago?
He seems pretty difficult, to please. I think there's probably some things they could have done in terms of the communication and the relationship. I do think that Green Bay is a unique organization, and in the absence of an actual owner, it can be probably a little bit more difficult to connect with your quarterback when you really need to. I think some of these top quarterbacks have a pipeline or an understanding with the owner of the team that maybe could be helpful during some of those difficult times. Maybe you could get some assurances from an owner. I think in Green Bay, they changed their structure a few years ago, and now the coach and the GM report directly to Mark Murphy, the president of the team. I think it's kind of muddied the waters. So that's probably one thing that's been a little bit complicating as they tried to navigate a relationship with the quarterback that was known as a complicated fellow, according to their former GM. So that could be one thing that just maybe played out the way it did, in part because of how they're structured.
Do you think, because he seems to be one of the things he was disgruntled with is not having enough input, not being heard enough in Green Bay, do you think he maybe went to a situation where he's being heard a little too much when you see all the former teammates that are joining him with the Jets? Probably.
I think that's the top quarterbacks have always been, the most important guy, but now they're making $50 million a year. And so they really have an outsized position within their teams. And I think it is a little bit of a difficult thing to manage. It'll be fine probably this first year. But when difficult decisions have to be made, I think the art of it really as a GM would be to respectfully listen and then communicate why you may be doing something differently. You can't just go along with what the quarterback wants all the time. That's not how good teams are run. But I think if you're upfront and explaining and being respectful, you have a chance to manage it.
Mike, fantastic stuff. Have a great weekend, my friend. Let's do this again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, there goes Mike Sando from The Athletic. He was on the Folsom Lake Honda hotline. Folsom Lake Honda, your one-stop Honda shop. The no owner thing with Green Bay absolutely makes it more difficult because you don't have the one person that walks into the room and says, no, this is what we're doing. That this is how we're going to handle it. And so
for a long time, I thought that worked in their advantage. And then Mark Murphy, their president, he is trying to sort of have that kind of structure where he's the guy. And honestly, Nick, I feel like that's where things started to go wrong for them. But I don't know. It's a unique situation for sure.